Hi everyone, welcome to Ask the Producers. This is an event by Rise and Shine. Rise and Shine is about giving everyone a voice within the podcast industry and within the radio industries, regardless of income. Rise and Shine do monthly Rise workshops and panels where radio professionals share their knowledge, and they also do Shine events to help you with promoting your content and furthering your career. So today, 3 experts from across the audio community will answer your questions on production. You can ask questions through the chat box on the YouTube stream page, and I will then ask them to our experts. I'm going to begin by asking our 3 lovely experts to introduce themselves.
I'll jump in. Hi, I'm Alex, currently a freelance audio producer, work sort of across the BBC and other places, but yeah, podcast audio producing at the moment for me.
Hi everyone, my name is Jaja. I'm currently working at Broccoli Content as a producer. I joined in January actually of 2020, and prior to that I was working as a radio producer and researcher at the BBC and some community radio stations also. So that's a bit about me and my background.
I'm Seb. I am a radio producer, I guess. It'd be weird if I wasn't in this chat. I have been working in radio for 15 years, started in community radio, then went to the BBC about 13 years ago, and now I'm a freelance exec producer for brands and organisations.
Great. Sarah, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
Sure. I'm Sarah. I run Rise and Shine, and yeah, I'm freelance. I've just gone freelance in the middle of a pandemic, which is always a great thing to do. And I originally come from a radio background, moving into podcast maybe a few years ago. But yeah.
Great. Maybe I'll say a little bit about myself as well. So I'm Sonia. I work at a charity called Nesta. I help out with their podcasts there. And I also have my own podcast now called Black Insight, which is about African news. So one question that I want to ask is, what is everybody working on at the moment?
I can chime in there. So I'm currently at Broccoli Content. I'm working on a book club type podcast. So it is a book club and we are launching in 2021. It's really exciting. It's basically a book club within a podcast. And this is the first, I would say, project that I've done for Broccoli Content. So I guess it's a chance to prove myself to my boss, and also just to bring new intellectual voices. The whole premise of the book club is to learn. There's a lot of opinions on the timeline that we see. I think we're all part of the timeline, and we see a lot of information being put on there that may not be quite accurate. So I think it's good to have conversation about what we've learnt together collectively, and collectively learn together and just have more informed opinions rather than just based on our own ideas of what we already think. So that's the basis of the book club. And yeah, we've finished like quite a few. We had 4 versions of anthems in this year from 2020 all through. We've also got a segment that Hannah Walker-Brown was inspired to do called Gender Euphoria, which is basically celebrating our gender, and instead of it being it's basically stemmed from everything that we've been seeing online and the negativity that we've been seeing in regards to, the attack on people's genders, especially in the trans community. And we are basically using this platform to celebrate and to have a bit more positivity, especially during this time. So look out for that hashtag gender euphoria, and that's basically what we're doing this year.
Love it. Alex, do you want to tell us about what you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of what I do is sort of brands or individuals will approach me with perhaps ideas for podcasts, or they want to get involved in podcasting but don't quite have an idea yet. So a lot of the work I do is consulting them, getting them ready, and then launching them into podcasts. So I'm sort of working on 5 or 6 at the moment, but sort of more notably, I guess, are ones that are sort of ever changing. There's one called Breakout Culture, which is with Ed Vasey. He's a previous MP and culture minister, and that's for Country and Townhouse magazine. So he's the culture editor for the magazine. So him and a co-host sort of run through culture picks. It's been quite more relevant than ever, I think, through lockdown, because they've been curating culture picks that have been accessible during a lockdown. So we've spoken to, art installations that are online and galleries that are opening up these new digital exhibitions and things. So I think perhaps a bit of a change in comparison to normal sort of culture content. And then another one I'm working on is a Total Saints podcast, which is a football podcast for Southampton Football Club. And they've been running that for a couple of years, and they're quite heavily embedded in the football community. And they've been doing really well with that, and they're building up into sort of, I think, 140 episodes soon of that. So I've been working with them since the last couple of months, I think. And then on the side of that, I'm sort of trying to build myself into a production company rather than just being an individual, because I'm really passionate about beginning to create original content for myself under a sort of a banner that I'm controlling. I can take it in a direction that I'm really interested in. So trying to do that on the side of freelance work.
Sounds like you're juggling a lot, but sounds good as well.
Yes, forever juggling.
Seb, what about you? What are you working on?
I mean, normally I'd have quite a long list of things to talk about, but actually at the moment I'm working on self-care, which is something that I maybe a month ago wouldn't have admitted out loud. But at the beginning of lockdown, last year I planned to launch a radio station for the LGBTQIA+ community. And we planned to launch it the first week of April. In fact, we planned to launch it on April 1st, and then obviously lockdown happened end of March. So we delayed everything by a couple of weeks, and instead of having a radio station that Soho Radio were broadcasting one for 8 hours a week, where you had a real life studio where people could just drop in and it'd be very open to anyone, the only barrier to entry being that you can get to Soho. It ended up being a lot of pre-production and a lot of wrangling of editing and trying to find people to lots of hands instead of maybe only a couple, which weekly for 8 months just took it out of me. And I, instead of having a absolute mental breakdown, went, let's just put this on hiatus till the new year. So I've had a nice couple of weeks of not thinking about radio, apart from professional podcast stuff, which is a bit boring. And we at the moment I'm working on relaunching that a bit better, a bit more structured, and a bit less for 2021.
That sounds great. I also want to ask, so if somebody wants to begin, like, piece of advice would you give them? Like, if somebody wants to start but they just don't know where to start?
What, in podcasting or in audio generally?
In audio generally.
I mean, my biggest thing is technically everyone, most people that want to get into it technically have a smartphone now. So there's no excuse about technology. Before, you would have to have a really decent microphone, a really good laptop to edit on, some really decent headphones. You want to spend some money on some good audio editing software. You can do it all on an iPhone now or any other smartphone. So actually, the barrier of, I've got to have the kit isn't there, but it's just the idea. Why are you doing it? Who's it for? What's unique about it? Is it just it's your story that you're telling? Great. then really lean into that. But if it's not, what's the USP? Why would anyone listen to it? Really focus on an idea, and then from that, nurture a product from it. So nurture some audio from it, test some stuff. But for me, I think the idea is king or queen.
Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, I guess furthering on what from Seb said, really. It depends if you're looking to get into radio, just audio generally, podcasting. I think for me, it's something that I've always tried to continue doing all throughout. Sort of, I've been involved, I guess, for sort of 6 or 7 years now. Is just nurturing your network. So for me, just keeping in touch with people that I've met along the way. Obviously, in the early days, that was in the form of, you're doing shadowing shifts and free work for different production companies or stations. Keeping in touch with those people, seeing where their network expands to, utilizing that in sort of not in a cringy sort of tell me who you know and I'll grab everyone as quick as I can sort of thing. But just organically trying to build your own network up and seeing where that can take you. Because more often than not, the 6 rules of sort of separation, you can get yourself anywhere if you just place yourself in the right position to begin with. I think just keeping in touch with people, keeping yourself friendly in the industry to begin with, and that will just open up your options massively right away. It'll cast a really wide net, and that was something that really helped me, especially in the early days.
Jaja, what do you think?
I can only echo Alex and Seb's points, really. I think I doubled down on networking. Networking is so important. That's literally how I've been able to maneuver in this industry, because I've kept good working relationships with people and I've always checked back in with people. And just being keen. I was very, very keen. Maybe a little bit too keen, but if somebody sees that you've got a passion or you're excited about it, I think that's definitely something. You even if they don't have necessarily all the skills that you need, if you can see that somebody's really interested in something, they would, you'd want to give them an opportunity. I think only to add would be doing your research and just making sure that you kind of know what you want to do. I think a lot of people, they're like, I want to do a podcast with my friends. We have great conversation. But the thing is that you have great conversations. And so does John over there. So it's what makes you a little bit different, finding a little bit of a USP, I always use this example, if you like bird watching and that's a little bit niche, go for it. There's not many bird watching, well, there may be, I haven't Googled, but maybe there's not many bird watching podcasts out there. Or if you're trying to get into radio, what can make you a little bit different from, somebody else over there? So identifying your USP.
So that's bird watching yeah, got it. Okay. Afterwards.
So Francesca is asking, what parts of podcasting do you find the hardest and which parts do you find the easiest? Anybody feel free to jump in.
I mean, I will personally, the hardest thing that I find as kind of an exec producer role is it's as different as if you're the creative, but as somebody that's trying to, I learned a great word the other day, a dramaturg, which is somebody who works in theatre and comes in and isn't a playwright, isn't a writer, but just sits there, watches, and then gives notes on the beat or when you should do something. And I find myself in that position a lot with podcasts, and I think the hardest thing I have is people's ideas are very precious, and people are very enthusiastic about podcasts. And I think when it gets to a level when someone wants to sink their own money into a project, and they're like, yeah, it's a really good idea, let's spend some money, get a producer or whatever, then feedback can become very fought against. And I have lost work, in fact, because I've said, well, I don't think you should do this because of A, B, and C. I don't think you should do this because there's another podcast with exactly the same name. or because there's a new podcast that's just come out that's top of the iTunes charts, which covers exactly the same subject in exactly the same tone of voice that you want. And copying rather than being original probably is lots of things. And I think being able to, I think as talent, I think looking to your peers, people that you trust not to steal your ideas, so your peers, and getting and actually getting feedback and trying to take that on board and seeing actually where might they be right and where might actually I need, and actually not taking everything on board, not taking every bit of feedback and going, all right, I'm definitely going to change this, I'm going to change that, I've got to scrap this, because actually we all think differently, we all have our different lived experiences, we all have our different intersections on life, we all have our different lenses, and actually what might not be my cup of tea might be someone else's down to the ground. They might absolutely love it, but if somebody says, "Oh, have you thought about this?" Actually going, "Oh, maybe I will. Maybe I'll take a day and think about it, or maybe I'll take an hour, or 5 minutes even, and just sit with an idea and go, could that work? And then what's best?" And I think that's a really important thing. Is kind of that kind of advice and that kind of feedback amongst your trusted peers is not something to be sniffed at, but also something to be taken with a pinch of salt.
Yeah, I guess I can jump in as well. I think maybe worst off in the sort of all-encompassing role that I feel like I'm kind of in with general podcast producer at the moment, I guess is kind of that fight every step of the way. So, whether it be microphone choice or whether to even use a microphone, especially when you're working with, brands or clients that have just never even stepped into the realm of broadcasting, be it podcast, radio, or whatever else. They've only done written work, perhaps. And then sort of starting that process up with every new project, it can become quite a tiring thing to do that every time. But I guess on the flip side of that is when you find someone, a client or someone that comes to you and they're just open to everything and it's a collaboration. For me, that's the best part of it is someone that trusts you explicitly, and the back and forth is great, and the conversation flows a lot better. For me, that's definitely what I enjoy from it, not having to fight with somebody every single day.
I agree with that point. I think the hardest thing for me would be the admin. So yes, creating this program, recording, editing process is quite lengthy if you record a lot, obviously, as well. But I think the hardest thing for me is the admin. So making sure that you've got the body of the text or the summary of what the program is, and words don't come as naturally to me when I'm writing them down. I can talk for years, but words on the page, it's tricky for me to sell a show. And I think marketing as well, because I always compare making a podcast and not being able to market it properly, like making a well-crafted meal and it's super hot and you're ready to serve it to somebody and putting it there. But if you haven't marketed it well, it's just going to go cold and nobody's going to see it. And I feel like marketing in podcasting is very challenging. I don't think anybody has cracked it yet, especially not in the UK. Maybe in the US, but in the UK especially, nobody's really cracked it. So I think that is the most challenging thing, is just getting people to listen in and to, double down and tune in, really.
Great, thank you. And Lisa is asking, where do you start when budgeting for a podcast that involves a client or that is for a client?
To be honest, I can't say that I've done a great deal of budgeting myself with the projects I've worked on. Often with the people I've worked for in particular, it's just the people who know they want to do something. I'll tell them how much that will cost in terms of my time, production costs, equipment if they need it, especially this year whilst everything's been from home. It's a big shift into buying home recording equipment rather than going to somewhere to do so. That's the price I quote, which generally should be sort of standard across the board, and that's kind of what I take to them, and then that price just rolls on. So I can't say personally I've not done a great deal of specific budgeting for bigger length projects myself anyway.
Does anyone else have any input on that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, with budgeting.
Yeah, so I I recently, it's funny, you as a freelancer, almost my whole life, I always quote for my time, and I estimated how long is it going to take me to do it, what day rate, what do I think is a market day rate, what do I think is acceptable, what do I think I want to charge for something, equipment, time, travel, but then I have worked with podcast companies recently and looking into setting up my own, and I am still shocked about some of the numbers and some of the figures that I have seen written down on budgets for podcasts. And it's and then that I've then quoted other people for that have either been accepted or gone, oh, actually maybe not this, but how about this? I think there's a real difference in, as a freelancer doing something on your own and a podcast house budgeting. There's a massive difference in the amount people spend, and I think it really comes down to the client. What kind of client are they? I've had some big brands approach me or a friend as a freelancer because they don't know the podcast companies are popping up everywhere. They don't understand that actually, for somebody their size, they probably shouldn't go to an individual. They should probably go to a big company that has the insurance of different employees that can still deliver their work, and if someone goes ill, etc., etc. But it brings in a very interesting question of how much should you charge. And I think that the first instance is work out who your client are. What size of business are they? How big do you think their marketing budget is if it's a marketing exercise? If it's a charity, if it's a small business, then quote them your day rate. Talk about a project fee. See what's reasonable for them. But if it's a bigger business, and in fact with anybody, but especially with a bigger business or a brand, I'd be very tempted to the first question being, what are your expectations and what's your budget? And it's a very scary question to ask. And I'm 33, and I've only learned that in the last few years, is what's your budget? And my partner, my wife, has worked in marketing her whole adult life. And the question she asks whenever working with a freelancer is, what's your cost? And rarely people ask her, well, what's your budget? And she's told me every time somebody asks her what's the budget, they normally get paid more because they're asking the right questions. And I think there's a really big thing about asking what the budget is, what they want, and then and I think that's where you start to approach it, because it's a difference between charging £1,000, £800 to £1,500 an episode, to charging 10 to 15 to £25,000 an episode, depending on the content.
Jaja, do you want to jump in? Okay, so Connor is asking, this is a question for you, Jaja. For the book club, what format ideas did you play with, and what kind of format did you settle on?
Good question. So obviously book clubs nowadays are usually just conversational, or it's like an interview with an author. You don't really have, well, I've never listened to a book club within a podcast. I don't know if it exists, but I did look on iTunes, and the only one that came up was Radio 4. And we were talking about not having the book club as just an interview with the author, as I just said, because you can find that everywhere. I wanted it to be conversational, so it wasn't so stilted, but the topics that we do talk about, maybe they're all topics that we are not necessarily experienced with, but somewhat there's a vague, there'll be a vagueness of familiarity, if that makes sense. So we would have heard of it or something like that, but we wouldn't have known much about it. And that's a lot of the topics that happen in society. That's why a lot of people get into trouble and they get cancelled, because they don't know what they're talking about. and not to be judgmental or disrespectful, but it's just facts that if you do your research, you'll know how to say things that aren't offensive, or you'll know how to word some text or say something that is a bit more informed. So the whole point of us framing it around learning is just to have open conversation and for people to share their own perspectives. So how it's formatted is that we've got the staple, who's the host, and we've got a contributor who's outside of Broccoli team, and then there'll be somebody who's part of the Broccoli team. So two people who are staples, or because the book club is usually with a session of people who are all usually the same people, right? You meet up like every month, you meet with the same people. So we wanted to have some kind of constant. So so we've got, it's two parts. We've got the book club, and then the second part is with the author. So that's what we've focused on. And it's ever evolving, ever changing. It's one book a month, and you can read along with us. So, and you can send your voice notes and things like that. So we want it to be more of a come and read with us, a collective learning, as I said before.
Love that. So Scott is asking, when editing, do you have a recommended order of steps in your process? So for example, de-umming, and then removing noise, and then EQ, and considering the narrative structure. So how do you go about that?
I mean, okay, I'll take this. Well, I think we all, but I'll go first. It depends. Again, it depends on what the project is. I think some projects I purposely frame the narrative to the client or to the talent that actually it should be done as live, because it's a better feeling. So if it's done as live, you don't need to touch up the ums and ahs unless there's a really big pause or there's a really big like, oh God, what am I going to say next? Oh, that was it, kind of thing. Then I might cut that out. But that then comes in the edit. So then my first step is run it through processing, make sure there's no background noise, make sure it sounds really nice and crisp. Some of that will be EQ. Most of that will just be some Zytope filters or something. It will just be something really just to clean the audio quite nicely. And then it's just editing. And then topping and tailing, adding audio. I think if something's multi-tracked, and if something's more complex, I kind of still clean audio first and have master or have primary audio sources that then I edit from, that are very clean and that aren't edited at all. So then clips come out of there. But I feel like that's kind of a new thing for me. I think only until a few years ago, even when I was at the BBC, I wasn't told to do that. I would edit something and then run it through a process later, which is a nightmare, because if you run it through processing after you've edited it, all your clips sound different, and then you can't run one editing process through. So that was almost a decade of doing it wrong. But I think cleaning the audio first is probably it will save time in the long term.
Yeah, I agree with what said definitely. For me, I guess, where I've had, I think, maybe 9 projects since the first lockdown started, a lot of things running at the same time, I find for me the first thing I do is make sure that I'm organized. So I've got folders for each project set up, episodes for each episode that come in with folders to begin with, and then I can funnel everything as it comes in, because often you've got one email, but everyone's firing into that one email, so you've got 6 or 7 podcasts potentially all sending you files at all different times of the day. And so I tend to just download those as they come in, make sure they're in the right file, so when I come to do it, and it might not even be for a couple of weeks, everything's in the right place. And make sure it's all named correctly as well, because the worst thing is when Audition or whatever pops up and it says, we don't recognize this file that is called XYZ 300297. It's like, I don't know where to find that. So make sure everything's named, labeled correctly. So when it goes into your editing software, super easy to see. And then, very similar process to Seb. I get the levels right, processing first. All of the stuff I do at the moment is multi-track, so several people chiming in throughout for different conversations. So get them all on their own track, and then go through and the narrative of it, edit the content down, chop out the ums and ahs in the multi-track session as you go along, and tweak as you go as well. So if you spot something as a producer that doesn't sound right, isn't a right fit, perhaps could be offensive, and they just haven't realized in the moment, and you need to make a note to get rid of that, then that's your job. And that's kind of why you're there. You're that second pair of ears. Quite often I've found that when I've edited work for somebody, they've made a joke in passing, and I have to get back to them right away and say, this joke doesn't land right, or this isn't, this is not a good joke. It's offensive. And 9 times out of 10, the person hasn't heard it, and they're really appreciative of you pointing that out. The 1 time out of 10, they'll go like, no, this is a great joke, leave that in. Then it's up to you, I guess. You can stand your ground on that one or not. But yeah, so edit the content down, get the narrative. Second would be for me.
I would say the same. There's very, very similar. I would say I'm technically self-taught, even though I went to uni for media production. I didn't really do very much of that in my media production degree. So a lot of my process is quite lengthy, and I think there's so many tips and tricks that I don't use that I just, some whiz would know that I need to go and like sit at their feet and learn how to, shortcuts. But I think I kind of run through it similar to the to everybody else. I kind of run through it, look for imperfection. So as you were saying, Alex, like jokes that don't land or things that are quite offensive. And one of my rules is never let the talent listen back to their audio afterwards ever, because that's yours. They've kind of like done like a secret contract to say that they can't, if in the moment they say okay, off the record, or they say leave this in, I'll honor that. But everything else I've got creative control over. And also one thing to note as well is cutting your darlings. So I don't know if you guys have probably got your own terminology for it, but there's sweet moments where you're like, oh my god, I really don't want to let go of this bit, but I need this podcast to be 30 minutes, and this is bringing it over to 35, and it's a big chunk. That's really part of my editing process, just letting go of things that I think really make the podcast, but the listener will never know. The listener will never know that it was in there. So I think that's part of my editing process, just to add on, because you guys said everything perfectly.
Can I just back up what Jaja said, and not letting people listen to audio after they've recorded it is such a big thing, that is mind-blowing. Like, we're going to record this, then we're going to produce it, and we're going to release it. Unless it's a project that's come into you. So I took over a podcast after its first series and started editing it, and one of the talent was the exec producer, or basically owned the IP, owned the podcast, and he listened to it a couple of times. But I was like, now you're happy that it sounds good. We don't do that, because the back and forth is a nightmare. And Jaja's absolutely brilliant to bring it up. Just don't let them listen to it. It's done now. If you've hired a professional, trust the professional.
So Grace is asking, are there any podcasts that you think have gone under the radar that you'd recommend?
It's a great question, because I guess it depends how you define under the radar. One for me that I'm absolutely in love with at the moment, although I've been in love with it since it began, so it was under the radar. I think maybe now it's starting to flag up as more of a popular podcast, but it's called Dead Eyes. Don't know if any of you guys have heard of it, but it's, long story short, it's essentially an American comedian called Connor Ratliff. And in 2001, when Band of Brothers was coming out, Tom Hanks, Steven Spielberg, big, huge, one of the most groundbreaking TV shows of all time, Connor was cast as an extra in Band of Brothers, and then fired by Tom Hanks shortly after, because he was told by his casting manager that he had dead eyes. That was his feedback, that alone. So Connor Ratliff spends what is now 2 seasons exploring that theme as to why he was let go from Band of Brothers, if he's really got dead eyes. I'm hoping with a sweet payoff that Tom Hanks will eventually appear on the podcast. inevitably. That'll be glorious. But for me, he's a comedian by trade, and he does stand-up comedy and improv shows, so he's hilarious. So for me, that's my top pick at the moment.
That sounds hilarious. I might check that out. This may not be under the radar, but I haven't seen many people talk about it. And I'm from a music background, so I do have a thing for music, conversational podcasts, unfortunately. And I don't mean, unfortunately, that we shouldn't like them, but I know people hate conversational podcasts because everybody here in the UK does conversational podcasts. But Rick Rubin and Malcolm Gladwell have got a podcast called Broken Record. And I know that they're big names already, but this podcast I personally think is amazing. So they've spoken to Andre 3000. Who else have they spoken to? Just loads of different people, and you just kind of get a different side to Rick Rubin. He's a proper nerd, and I love listening to nerdy podcasts. I just think, why not? And can I just put in another one? I'm being cheeky, but I put in another one. It's called Are We Live? And it's by like these 4 British musicians who are here. I think it's Zach Abel, Barney Artist, Tom Mish, and somebody else. And that was the podcast that I started listening to in 2014. And I was just like, this is amazing. They sold out like venues, just talking about music. And yeah, I'm a bit of a nerd for that. So Are We Live and Broken Record. That's me.
Just subscribing to Are We Live now. That sounds great. Subscribe. I have I try not to listen to podcasts. And it's a really controversial thing for me to say, but I like, for example, when I heard George the Poet's podcast, the first episode, I listened to about 5 minutes and went, no, I can't listen to this, because I know I will just be replicating this subconsciously in my future projects. And I only listen to conversational podcasts that are really simple, by people that I like. So I don't subconsciously pick up editing techniques or like jokes or kind of like production jokes. So like if there's a particular setup to a particular type of music that is a regular gag or something, I don't like hearing it, because I don't like it seeping in, and for me to then subconsciously recreate it on someone else's work, which I find a big problem. I stupidly used to listen to Chris Moyles when he was on Radio 1 in The Breakfast Show, and I always hear myself, if I'm ever presenting something, slipping into this kind of fake, happy, good morning, blah blah, and it's like, oh no, shut up, no, you don't play a stupid jingle just because it's funny, and I soak everything in, and it's so if ever I hear anything that I really like and respect, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna say to myself, it's really good, and leave it. So the stuff that I listen to, I tell you what, the one thing that I definitely can't create is the Horn Sections podcast. The Horn Section is Alex Horn, the comedian, and his band of 5 musicians, and they interview a comedian. They have one comedian as a special guest host audience. And it's like 40 minutes of stupid songs and stupid jokes, which is quite nice, because I know it's not anything that I will ever work on. And then the other podcast that I listen to regularly is, Penn and Teller, the magician. So Penn has a podcast called Penn Sunday School, which is just him talking to two other magicians that he works with, not Teller. And it's quite interesting to hear somebody who used to call themselves a libertarian but isn't anymore, who's American and very outspoken, but also grown up out of his phase of kind of being very shouty. It's quite interesting to hear somebody different. I mean, I've spoken a long time to come to the conclusion that actually there's nothing that is up and coming that you should look out for that I know of.
Thanks for that, so.
Welcome.
Alex, this is a question for you.
Yes.
Mira is wondering, what do you do in your role as a podcast consultant? You said you're working on lots of different shows. So what do you choose to do or not do on each project? So for example, editing, sound design, etc.
Sure, yeah. So I guess typically the things I'll usually outsource will be the sound design or the music stuff, just because I wholeheartedly accept that's not my bag. Never has been, never will be. I love music, but I don't create music, nor do I know really what sounds great with other things. So I love to outsource that, and if I can get that commission, usually originally. And then on the consultancy front, I suppose it kind of just depends on, it really just depends on what the client's after. So I've done projects this year where I've gone into somewhere where they're looking to build a podcast they were an events company, and they were looking to start a podcast because obviously events have been completely ruled off this year and potentially into next year, so they needed another form of revenue. They were also thinking about launching an events course to go alongside that, so they were looking to build perhaps like a marketing funnel, I suppose would be a technical term for it. So for them, I went in, almost kind of taught them about what podcasting was and what they could do with it. I built their studio for them. In their office, they had some studio space, so I kitted out their studio, built their studio, and then acted as a kind of coach, I suppose, in the beginning stages. And then they've taken the podcast away and have hired someone to regularly produce that. So that was kind of my role with them. Usually I guess the way I kind of sell myself, I suppose, to clients is the end-to-end content production. So you come to me with an idea, we'll get that idea off the ground, running and regular. And that's everything from, script writing, editing, researching. It really does kind of vary depending on the project, really. But I try and do as much of it I can as myself, because I really enjoy doing it. So yeah, I've spent, a long time editing and script writing and researching because I enjoy those things. And that's why I'm in this industry in particular, is to be able to do those things. I'm not doing a sort of a less enjoyable 9 to 5 somewhere else to do this on the side. I've dedicated to this. So yeah, I try and do as much as I can myself, really.
Thank you. And a question for everyone. What's the most annoying thing that you hear in podcasts that you wish you could ban?
How does that jingle go at the end of adverts? Da-da-dum! I hate that. Just get rid of adverts. No, I mean, you can't get rid of adverts, but I wish, the one thing I wish in podcasting is that adverts were integrated better. And it means not just lobbing them on the beginning and end, which is convenient for listeners because it means you can just skip 30 seconds and you're into a podcast. I wish there was better integration somehow. I wish the monetization was better. The Americans do it, and it's a bit abrasive, but it's also better, where you'll get the presenter halfway through going, okay, and now Dymo have got this label maker, and it's really great, and I found it when I moved house, blah blah blah, and we'll talk about it for a minute or two, and I like the personalization aspects of it. I like the quite heavy product placement actually, because also you can just skip it forward. But there's something coming from broadcast radio I've always found very jarring about podcasting and advertising, and I don't think anybody in the UK has got it right yet, and I don't think America's got it right. I don't think that model's the best, but that's the one thing that really pees me off is Is it Acast that add those jingles to the end of stuff? It's so. If I hear that jingle one more time during a podcast, I'm gonna throw my phone across the room.
Oh gosh, I would say people don't really take me seriously when I say I'm a podcast producer. They're like, "Oh, that's cute. You produce podcasts." I think when I was in radio, people kind of saw it as a bigger deal. But I think because, as we said from the beginning, anybody can create a podcast of their own from their bedrooms or, from their mobile phones. People don't necessarily see it as something that you can make money from as well. A lot of people don't realize you can make money from podcasting. So I think it'd be nice to be taken seriously. But nowadays, I just allow people to think that way because it's fine. At the end of the day, I'm still being able to pay my bills. but yeah, I think eventually, I guess we'll be taken seriously. Taken seriously, sorry. But I think the Joe Rogan, even though I don't like uttering his name, the Joe Rogan situation, like him getting that amount of money and that being public, I think that really changed the game and people started looking at podcasting a little bit differently. But yeah, that's the most annoying thing for me.
Yeah, that's a good point. Joe Rogan, yeah. I think for me it is, I guess, like, I suppose if we're looking more about the content of a podcast, I suppose it's like this slapdash view that, and I'm kind of in two minds about it, that you can record a podcast with anything. For me personally, like, I think quality is king a lot of the time, and like, I do appreciate, not everybody can afford microphones, not everybody can afford whatever your circumstances may be, but I do think there's this big case to make for at least do the best with what you've got. I think even if you can use your computer microphone, like a built-in microphone, which usually for me is like that complete no, like, you don't use the computer microphone for anything, even talking to me, like, I don't want to hear it. But I think if you're doing that, at least try and learn the techniques to improve how that you can improve the quality of that microphone, and that will increase the quality to your listener. I think barely any listeners would, if they were surveyed, would agree and say, oh, quality is something I really look for. But I think it's one of those subconscious things that if you hear something and it's really bad, crackly, or you just leave everything in, where really you could cut half of it out because it sounds bad, or you've lost signal, or you don't bother to redo things that you've lost patches, especially if you're doing things virtually like we all are at the moment. I think for me that just feels lazy. Not saying you have to go out and buy a £500 microphone, but I think at least try and make an effort. You wouldn't go to the cinema, sit in a cinema chair and then watch, a standard definition, tiny little square box on the big 4K, 8K screen. You're in it for the experience. And for me, like, I want to at least hear you've made an effort.
Thank you. And Gurney is asking, what is the best door to learn for getting into production if money is no object?
Can you say that question again? Sorry, I wasn't sure about it.
What is the best door? So I think skill. What is the best skill to learn for getting into production if money is no object?
Is it DAW?
Yeah.
So digital audio workspace. So workflow. So the apps and stuff. I mean, if money's no object, it really depends on personal preference. My one thing is, don't use Audacity, please just don't use Audacity. If you haven't got any money, and you want to try something, download Reaper. Reaper's got a 90-day trial, and then it's very cheap after that. Although you can, I've been told, delete it and reinstall it, and you get the trial again. I mean, I'm just saying. Or you can change your computer clock. That's what I've been told. But I like Reaper a lot. I like Pro Tools. I like Adobe Audition. Adobe Audition. But then I have lots of other standalone applications to tidy audio. In fact, I think Zytope at the moment, Zytopia. I can't remember. I can never remember the brand name. I'll look at it. I'll find it out when I'm not talking. But it's got a Black Friday deal where it's like £600 worth of software they're selling for £40. And that's kind of like my main processing of audio goes through that. And I know a lot of broadcasters use that software, but it just depends. I think try it and see. It kind of depends how you work and how your brain works and what are the best keyboard shortcuts, what's the best user interface for you. For me, once you've got the audio tidy, it doesn't really matter which DAW you use because editing it's the same regardless. You still want to overlap stuff, you still want to multi-track stuff. I mean, some things will have different quirks. If you want to use then some hardware with it, then I guess it depends on what hardware you want to use. What's the compatibility with your software? So if you wanted to use a digital mixer, or you wanted to use like a MIDI keyboard, or you wanted to use something, or you wanted to use digital faders, and you want to do it all as if you're live, but then what's the best compatibility? But I think I think if money's no object, I really like Pro Tools. I just like Pro Tools. If money is an object, I say Reaper.
Whilst changing your clock.
All I'm saying is I've heard it. I don't know. I've just heard it.
I'll come off the back of what Seb just said, but I've only got one point to add. I think Adobe Audition is like universal, and everybody uses Adobe Audition. I learned that at university, I learned that at college, but it is expensive, and I don't think it's worth the money. There's just too many buttons. It's like you just want to drive, and you got all of these other buttons there. So I think Reaper. I've tried out Reaper. That's really good. Yeah. But yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
I guess quickly on that one, and I suppose to Seb's horror, when I was younger, I started editing on Audacity, and I felt that was a great place to begin learning, which I was kind of tinkering around with YouTube stuff at the time. So had my own sort of little YouTube channel doing gaming videos, so voiceover stuff. So that's what I was using it for. But when I went to college to do media production, my experience with Audacity really lended itself easily into Adobe Audition, which we used there. And I was sort of head and shoulders in terms of progress above everybody that had never seen a program like this before, because I'd spent time in Audacity. And then, yeah, I guess just since then, spending time I've used Adobe ever since. So yeah, for the last 10 years or so. But yeah, I think Adobe Audition's definitely a good place to start. And I think once you've learned the fundamentals of that, it really easily lends itself into the other programs, so the Pro Tools, the Reaper, whatever you choose to use. I worked for a production company for about a year, and they only use Pro Tools, and I'd never used Pro Tools before. But using Adobe Audition, it took me maybe an hour to pick up Pro Tools, because I just knew what I was looking at, and that made it all super easy. So I think once you've kind of learned one and spend loads of time on YouTube, you can learn everything you need to know about everything on YouTube tutorials. I don't think you need to spend any money apart from on the program itself, and even then, you can do for free.
Shout out Mike Russell. He knows everything. Mike Russell on YouTube, guys.
Absolutely.
Can I just say that I think that Reaper's a new discovery for me over the last couple of years, and it's so simple. Adobe Audition is definitely kind of the king of or queen of software for bigger complex edits. I think Pro Tools is kind of industry, is kind of like a top level broadcast industry standard for a lot of things, especially with more complex audio editing. But for podcasting, I think Adobe Audition is like really great, but Reaper's so easy and it's so simple. But it's really complex at the same time. But it's just like Jaja was saying, Audition has 1 million buttons on it. Or Reaper's got like 12, and it can do exactly the same kind of editing.
Wow. Emma is asking, what would your advice be to someone who wants to transition from broadcasting to production?
I'll just say that it's not the same. I only have been in podcasting technically for 2.5 years, coming up to 3 years now, and I'm still learning every single day that I can't just like throw something together and then that will be it. You have to plan, similar to what I believe Seb was saying earlier on. Well, both Seb and Alex were saying earlier on, structuring an interview or structuring a story, it should be in the pre-work before you record, because I'm finding out every single day that it's way harder to make something sound good after it's recorded if it's not that great, being very honest. So I've learned from my team that podcasting is more so like making a documentary or making a film, and radio, when I was in radio, it was kind of slapdash. You take what you got and you put it on air, and it's there for how many minutes it is, and then it's gone. You hardly really get to have a replay of that. So you have to be way more particular about what you put out there, and you can kind of allow a few hiccups and things like that when you're in broadcasting. When you're in radio, I feel like you just get away with way more. And I feel even like bad for even thinking that I can just waltz into podcasting like I know it all. I really don't, and I'm still learning every single day.
Yeah, I think Jaja definitely summarised that perfectly. I suppose just briefly to add on it, if you're in broadcasting, you want to go into production, in theory, you know all the right people around you already. So utilize those people, learn from those people. Don't just be the person behind the glass that's, broadcasting and then walking out at the end of the day. Like, absorb all that information, because, 10 feet away from you, you may have a whole host of talented producers if you're in a station or like on your network, wherever it may be, even LinkedIn. Like, you've got all that information around you. So yeah, utilize the people that have previously been helping you broadcast and try and absorb their information if you want to step into production.
Yeah, and I'll just add that coming from broadcast, you have a different brain to a lot of people that don't have broadcast experience. I feel like there is, not to demonize radio, although radio is my lifeblood and it's the thing that I love the most, more than podcasting, more than anything. Is as Jaja says, it's very slapdash. It's very, it's fine. We'll do another show tomorrow, and you're only as good as your last show. And no one listens, but even with BBC Sounds or with Global Play or whatever, no one really listens back to radio. But podcasts live there forever, so like the preparation is key. Having something prepped out and you know exactly where it's going to go. And if you've got good talent and they can do an interview that maybe you don't need as much prep, because you've done the rehearsals, you know the format of the show, so they kind of know what. But preparation is great. But I think coming from broadcast, having that experience of even being able to communicate with talent while they're recording in a booth, and knowing, let me give them this note that I know will trigger this thought, or let me try to steer the conversation in this way in a natural break. Those kind of things that you will know anyway, but in a live radio production environment, being able to really quick think on your feet is a really lovely skill to have, that a lot of people that come out straight out of university and go straight into production and audio editing won't have. So don't just listen to us and say, oh, actually, you had it easy, it's going to get harder. Actually, there's a lot of skill there that will benefit you. And actually will inform creative decisions, and not a lot of, like, I keep blowing people's minds when, even with podcasting being so like personal, I tell the Terry Wogan thing of talk to the one listener as if you're live on air, and people are like, oh my god, like, this is just radio. This is what you do. You talk to the listener, and our podcasts have to be this or that. It has to be a conversation between two. It has to be. I know it. So I think there's lots of skills there that are very useful and that shouldn't be shied away from bringing over to production.
And we have a question from Clizio. They're wondering, what would you suggest to be successful in pitching a new series to an independent production company that creates podcasts for bigger networks like the BBC?
I guess, do you have a contact with them already? Do you know them? I think being able to feel out them actually is quite useful. But then also, what's the pitch? Are you sure it's original? Have you got a killer name for it? Do you have talent attached to it already? Do you know how much they're going to cost? Then do you know, if I wanted to talk to a production company to then pitch onto a network, do I know that they've got a call out at the moment for specific content? There are commissioning editors of podcasts at the BBC who regularly put out, oh, we want this kind of content or that kind of content, and it's kind of a wink wink nudge nudge thing. It is publicly available knowledge, but it's not easy to find. So do you know that they're looking for this kind of content, or they will be in 6 months? So being able to use those networks and really kind of dig down into your contacts and say, look, what's coming up in a year? What can I start planning for? I think is really key, because you might have the best idea in the world, but actually, if a production company doesn't think a thing's going to take it up because they know the next year the BBC want more sci-fi, they want more true crime, and they want more queer content. And you're pitching something about you're pitching an antique show, for example. I don't know. Although antiquing would be a great podcast. You can't steal it, you two. Yeah. Then actually, that's you're not gonna. Your chances are less. Although if you have a specific idea that you want to pitch, and you're really passionate about it, I think having talent attached to it, having the branding, the name, an idea of the look and the feel, and even having a 2-3 minute sizzle reel of like, this is how it might sound, and approaching people and saying, I've got this idea, what do you think? And letting them buy in on the idea, not just going, I want to sell you this idea so you can sell it to the BBC. Going, I want to work with you on making this better. As soon as you make somebody feel like they're involved in the creative process or they are making it better and they're emotionally invested in it, they're more likely to work on it with you.
I guess very briefly, because it's something that I'm actually working on at the moment. I haven't done it as of yet, but I found that, yeah, like Seb said, kind of looking at what the production companies and the stations are doing in the future. I think also piggybacking your idea maybe off of some kind of event or anniversary or date or something like that is always a great hook, because, you know, if somebody's 150th anniversary of their death is coming up, you'd be sure that places are definitely going to be looking or will be more interested in content that goes around that. If it's their 148th anniversary, it's maybe not as exciting. But yeah, I found for me, and also stuff that you're already interested in and or passionate about. I think if you're trying to do an antiques podcast, for example, or maybe a bird watching podcast, and you don't care about bird watching or antiques, then you're going to really struggle. For me, what the things I've been working on in terms of pitching at the moment, or idea structure at the very least, it's stuff that I'm already engaged in or would like to be engaged in, like to learn more about.
Yeah, I don't really have much more to add because I believe everybody said everything. I think one thing that I'm personally working on, because I still need to garner some skills in the pitching field, but it's definitely delivering it with confidence, as Alex has basically covered, you know, believing in it. And I think that's with anything. If you believe in it, the person will believe in it, and being able to tell the story. Yeah.
Thank you. Alicia is asking, often there are technical skills you need. How do you go about acquiring these skills? So for example, editing, mixing, etc. Like if you don't have a degree, it's quite intimidating to start and self-teach. And also, sorry, I'm just adding, if you know of any good resources, could you also say?
Mike Russell on YouTube. I'll just say him. I think he's great. He taught me during uni because my teachers didn't. And and I am self-taught. It's taken a long time. I've been in audio since I was like 17, but I think, you know, I've still got lots to learn, but I think it's practice. If you don't practice it, you won't know it. So I know that I've gotten faster because I've just had to do more interviews. So practice, YouTube. I would say try not to pay £500 for a course because it's not worth it. And as we all said earlier on, YouTube is free.
I'll add just practice in YouTube. I completely agree. Just practice. I mean, and this is the one time when I think actually copying someone is good. I think listen to something, try replicate it with everything of your own, all your own assets, all your own. So if I heard something that I liked, I would try replicate it. Or the way I became a real radio nerd is I bought a mixing desk when I was like 14, 15, and I just replicated what I heard on the radio to myself and practice stuff. And it was like a cheap 30, well, back in those days, or maybe it's 50 quid, maybe I had some birthday money, but like, just practice creating, and then you will have your own individual creative ideas. But just practice as much as you can, and that mic fella on YouTube.
Yeah, echo what the other two have said for sure. I've done media since I was in sort of GCSE level, did it specifically for college, and then did specifically radio at degree level. And I pretty confident in saying that I don't think I learned anything about editing in particular from any of those places. It was all self-taught. I think what I learned from those places was structure, story, narrative, ideas around those things. The theory, I guess. I mean, that's kind of why you go to uni, is to write, long essays about theory of things. But I don't think I learned anything practical in terms of those skills directly from any teacher. All of that experience came mostly through YouTube, really was, and watching other people, not only learning the skills in a tutorial kind of way, but find people that have live streamed their editing process, and even if you don't understand 90% of it, you'll see a couple of things that you'll be able to pick up and then replicate your own sessions, even if it's as simple as remove background noise or normalize some audio, just simple things. And then those skills, if you retain it, if you write them down, or however you learn, those things will all slowly build up into very quickly into an editing process. I don't think any of us here listed an extremely long and lengthy process with our stuff. Just name it, put it all in order and throw it in and then chop it from there. But a lot of those skills are like really simple.
Thank you. Connor is asking, when you're working with clients who don't have experience in podcasts or podcasting, do you ever get pushback from clients on your pricing? How do you deal with that? Alex is smiling.
Yes, all of the time. Pushback constantly, pricing questions constantly. And it's something that I've spoken with Sarah quite a lot about this outside of this chat, but that's something I'm extremely passionate about, is sort of transparency with pay. Really for anything, to be honest, but I guess specifically for this because it's what we're all doing. But I think just knowing your worth, knowing what there's a huge race to the bottom that just seems to go on in particular with freelance creatives, I guess across the board. I think it happened for a long while with TV and video stuff, and they've unionized, so they've kind of put a bit of a stop to that. And I think it's really happening, even friends and people I went to school with, went to uni with, like they charge like horrifically low prices for things just because they don't know their worth. So I think, know what your worth is, know what you're willing to go down to, and try not to undercut everybody else is a great start. People will push you back. That's just business. People will push you back on your prices, even if they're quite happy. People, like if you go for a full-time position for anything, occasionally a boss will try and push your salary expectations down, and you're able to fight back on that, and you're able to tell them what you're worth. And more often than not, that's just what they want to hear. They want you to be confident in the price, because if they can knock you down a few £100 or a few £1,000, you can be absolutely sure they're going to try and do that. I mean, who wouldn't when everyone's relying on their money. But I think just know your worth, know what the rates are, talk to as many people as you can about what your worth is and at what level you are, and then go from there.
Mira is asking, your advice about pitching to clients and asking what their budget is really, really helpful. Do you have any other advice when developing new podcasts with clients?
I mean, what I will say to that is, from very recent experience actually, is ask them what they want first. And try to workshop their ideas. If you feel confident enough and creative enough to do that, that's the play. I think the moment you come and pitch a million ideas, or I constantly have a bank of ideas in my head that I've thought about, and if somebody says to me, "Oh, you know what might be good for that? This idea that I've been thinking of," and they go, "Well, actually, that's not what I had in my brain, so let's get rid of that." But actually, you ask them what they're thinking of. And this applies to everything about narrative. You just change the narrative of the conversation that you're having. You change their idea into your idea, but thinking that it's their idea. So if they say, "Oh, I want to do this thing about, I want to do a podcast about Dizzy Rascal, and I want to follow Dizzy Rascal as he moves between his house in Miami and Bo." Constantly on his private jet, and it's going to be private jet chats with Dizzy Rascal. I'm instantly like, yeah, great, that's a great idea. However, what have you thought about this idea? Have you thought about tweaking it a little bit? Oh, that's a really good idea, and I think it'd be even better if X, Y, Z. or oh, that really gives me this good idea because of this, and that really fits in with your idea. And I think that that's really a key thing, because some clients' ideas are absolutely atrocious. Some of them are brilliant, and it's great, and you're like, great, I love your idea, I can make it sound great, let's go. Some of them are the worst ideas I've ever had, and I've had production partners where we've got off a conference call and I've gone, that's completely and we've just sworn at each other for 5 minutes because they're a really well-paying client, but they want something that's absolutely rubbish. And then we stress for days thinking, how can we make this better? How can we convince them to change their name? How can we convince them that this won't work? And sometimes I can't. Like I've turned down work with I won't name names. I've turned down work with people who are high-profile celebrities that are very well respected because they had a really bad idea and they were really stuck to that idea. They were really glued to the idea, and I am quite bolshy and just went, that's a really bad name. And actually, what I should have done is gone, this name's interesting. Positive, negative, positive. The name's really interesting. It might be a bit similar to something on the market. Let's do some research to see if we can get it past the line, and then wait a week and go, actually, we should probably change it, and soften the blow. The dealing with clients is, especially if it's their idea, they're very attached to it normally, and it's kind of just convincing them that you know what you're talking about because they've come to you, but also that your ideas are their ideas is my big tip.
I'm not. Yeah, I don't think Seb's covered that. So yeah, I've got nothing to add on that one.
Oh, okay. So next question, Makeda is saying, hi all, I'm loving this advice so far. My question is, what is the audio industry looking for from the next wave of podcasters, producers, presenters, editors, etc.?
I think Seb said this earlier on, but just finding it out. I think I believe like the BBC, I think every year they have like a commissioning stage where they say what they're looking for. So look out on their pages, the big companies, if you're trying to pitch to big companies about what they're looking for. And I think also there's things in society that happen on a day-to-day basis that we need to acknowledge as well. And if you can see that there's a community that's being underrepresented, like I would say pitch that. The audio industry is very underrepresented. We know this already. All of us know this. So if there's something that you feel that you can bring to the table that's different, and as Seb and Alex said, like not having the same thing that's in the chart or anything like that, like if it's actually different, bring it to the table. I think why not? Because if you're passionate about it, just sell it. But I think, yeah, from what I've seen from this year, I think there's a lot of work to do. There's so many different fields to pitch to. And yeah, I think just creative ideas.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think personally, kind of what I look for, and I think things that stand out to me and what I love to see is innovation and something new. I mean, we get so many hundreds of thousands of new podcasts coming in every single week at the moment. Everybody's getting into it and the numbers growing like crazy. But that one idea that, that one show that stands out, that blows up, that it's the talking point for everybody. I think that's what's really exciting for me. And these new shows pop up all the time and they really stand out to everybody. And of course, everybody has their own list of standout shows. Like, Dead Eyes, I mentioned earlier, is like a big one for me, but people might not have heard of that one. But I mean, the big ideas that just blow up. Really seeing those come through, like when we all heard Serial 6 or 7, whatever it was, years ago now, that was a huge thing. It was just so fresh and new. And then more recently, things like Have You Heard George's podcast? And it's just this beautiful soundscape. And then, you've got people like Radio 4, they had a great series called Forest 404, which was an audio drama, but the sound design was just breathtaking. And it's things like that that really shine through. So yeah, I just love seeing those big projects, maybe on a small budget. They're just like the first series of George's podcast was just done by him. It wasn't owned by the BBC at the time, and he just did that himself. And that's some of the most gorgeous podcasting I think you can hear. Just seeing those stories come through, I think is what's brilliant for me, and what I'm excited to see every year at the moment.
Seb, do you have anything to add?
I mean, what I would say is just innovation is what I think is key now. The field of podcasting is overpopulated. There's so many people. There are too many podcasts for the amount of listening time there is available now. And I am not interested in the same thing that's there already. I think a lot of people are listening to stuff they've listened to for years because it's part of humans like routine, so it's part of our routine to listen to the same things we really love. But there's not a lot of time for new things, so I think it has to stand out. It has to be innovative in some way, and I completely agree with Alex on this one. It has to. I'd love to hear something new, a different take on podcasting. I know we've all got ideas, and I'm sure people watching now have something. It's just a matter of working out how to make it into a digestible podcast form. And actually, if you've got an idea, if you're watching, you've got an idea, and you think, oh, it won't work as a podcast, try it. Seriously, try it, because it might. You might have to adapt it slightly, but it might. And I think you listen to George's thing, and you think, oh, that shouldn't work as a podcast. And then it does, and then there are loads like it. You listen to something like Serial, shouldn't work as a podcast, and it does, and now there are loads like it. And it's that thing of take a format that doesn't work as a podcast and make it work as a podcast, or come up with something brand new.
Thank you. Alicia is asking, what does it mean to run it through processing?
Okay, so basically you have applications that are specifically built for one purpose, or actually Adobe Audition has them. Most DAWs have them, and it's just like a process that cleans audio up. So it'll be a filter that takes off certain frequencies, or it will be a gate that cuts out below a certain volume, or there'll be lots of different types of processing that do different things to the audio and the waveforms and the frequencies within that audio. And I will find out now what the software that I use is called, because I always forget the actual name of it.
I think it's Isotope R8, right?
You know what? It is Isotope R8.
Isotope R8. Yeah,
it's really cheap. I say Zootopia, but it's Isotope. Yeah, you're right. And at the moment there's a whole package of their whole suite for £40. Which is like genuinely something that I would recommend to everybody. And it just cleans it, makes it, instead of it sounding like it then sounds clean, and it sounds crisp. And instead of having like a in the background, you then hear the silence between words. Hopefully, if it's recorded well. There is a bit of skill in recording as well, and not recording it underneath an air conditioning unit, which a lot of people make the mistake of. But apart from that, if your talent is happy to either be freezing cold or boiling hot in a room, you've got good audio. If they demand the air conditioning on, you've got a lot of work cleaning it up.
Someone is asking, often I catch myself being stuck researching ideas off the internet. Have you found inspiration or subjects from just venturing outside when able to, or without the internet research?
I think just talk to people, just have conversations. I think there's this podcast that BBC World Service did called The Neighbourhood. And it's narrated by some famous guy, but I should know who he is, but I don't know who he is. And amazing. It's literally just talking to people about like how they live. And there's like a documentary style, and it's only like 6 parts, and it's so basic. Literally, what we're saying. Like, if you've got an idea, just go for it. But it's such a basic idea that somebody probably just thought, I'm having a conversation with this person. Can I record it into a podcast? And I think I've been creatively, I don't know what the word is, like blocked up a little bit during this period of time, because I haven't been able to speak to people and I haven't ventured out really that much. So you don't really get, well, I haven't personally had as much creativity because I've been stuck indoors. But yeah, go outside and go and have a walk, or go in the woods, or, you know, speak to your neighbor from across the, you know, in the garden or something like that. Like, I think it's definitely good to talk to people. I think whoever asked this question knew what they were asking from the question. I think they know that they need to go out and venture out.
It's time to go outside.
Use your government mandated walk.
Does anybody have anything else that they want to add to that question?
Yeah, I can jump in. Yeah, again, for me, I think ideas can come from everywhere, which is kind of the cool thing, especially once you get into your own rhythm. But yeah, taking a walk is a brilliant way. More recently, I guess I had an idea for something I'm working on at the moment that loosely came from a TV show I watched. It was years old. I was watching a repeat. And then I took that and I was like, that's interesting. Let me look into that further. And then kind of used the internet, but found a book that discovered a theme within that idea. And then the book had a big mystery around it that the book was exploring. And it's like, you know, these things can really quickly build into interesting ideas that just haven't made it onto this format yet. You know, we're fairly new for the most part. Podcasting, obviously, it's been going on for over a decade easily, but mainstream it is a few years old. So there is a ton of amazing ideas just yet to be explored. But yeah, I think you can take inspiration from everywhere, definitely.
I mean, and what I would add is the UK is like 5 years behind America. Listen to a lot of American podcasts. Listen to a variety of different American podcasts, and explore the different formats, and not the content, but how it's delivered, what they're talking about, what are the themes or the things. How is the series structured? Is it one thing that's been split over 10 episodes, or is it 10 different episodes, and how are they doing it, and why are they doing it? I think that's a big thing. But also, just go outside, talk to someone, talk to anyone, just do something that isn't researching online, because researching online, everything's online. I say that there's a YouTuber that I really love who does this thing that I'm not going to talk about, but it's a specific type of YouTube show, and I was watching it going, why has no one done a podcast of this? Not of their specific content, but of this style of YouTube. And I am hopefully in January starting it, because I'm just like, there's an obvious gap of like, no one's doing this, and I'm gonna do it because I'm passionate about it, not just because the gap's there. And I think that's another thing, is like, if you can see a gap, it's like Dragon's Den when you're pitching stuff. How will this help my life in some way? What's the gap for this? And then, are you passionate about it? If not, give it to someone else.
Although nobody is offering you £500,000 for any podcast idea.
I mean, are they? Aren't they? They're not.
Who knows? Not me.
I mean, I'll take 500.
We have another question. So this is going back to the don't let the talent listen. I think this is you, Seb. When it comes to interviews which are very personal or are talking about traumatic events, isn't it ethical to let the interviewee listen back if they want?
Jaja, do you want to take this, or do you want?
Sure, I guess we can share it, but the whole point of, and I totally understand ethical reasons and moralistic reasons as well, like you have to be empathetic. But I definitely think that if you are in a space where you've verbally agreed to share your story, it's a verbal contract to a certain extent. So if you in the conversation say, please don't include that bit, and this is off the record, I agree, I will not put that bit in at all. But after the fact, when we've recorded, packed up, you know, I feel that it's an interference in the creative process, because most people, first of all, don't like how they sound in audio, so they'll be like, oh, I don't like that, or, you know. And second of all, yeah, there are certain things that may be said that they may not like, but I think if they've given you a precursor and they've said off the record, or after they remember, oh, please don't include this bit because it involves somebody else, I think then, you know, show some kind of grace. But I think when people who are not familiar with audio editing get involved in that process, I think that it's a bit tricky, and it's, yeah.
I mean, it's hitting the spot perfectly, that last comment, which is people don't understand the audio editing process. So, and also a lot of people who are case studies, that as I'll reference them now, case studies normally don't understand storytelling process. So won't understand that the episode of the podcast we're creating, or the show, wants a story arc of some kind. Because talking back to Alex's point of the theory of radio, or the theory of storytelling, is you want possibly a 3-act structure, beginning, middle, and end. You want to take the listener on a journey. So you want to have the presenter setting the topic up, the interview, a conclusion. And in that interview, you want that same thing. You want a beginning, middle, and end. You want the listener to be able to follow it. Now, if I'm interviewing somebody about something very sensitive, and they want one thing taken out, but then the whole story doesn't make sense, then I have to make a judgment call. Do we take that bit out? Do we take the whole interview out and find someone else, or do we leave it in because we think it's not sensitive to them, it's not embarrassing them, or it's not a sensitive thing that isn't public information? I think, as Jaja says, I think, obviously, if someone's talking about, I don't know, someone being gay and they're not out of the closet, or someone's talking about a friend that's committed a crime, or someone's talking about something that either legally or morally shouldn't be in it, take it out. If someone says they're off the record, that's why I like recording with something with faders. If someone says, oh, this is off the record, I go, oh, hold on, and I just bring my faders down, so I'm not even recording them, as like a good courtesy, and also so they feel safe and secure. But like, even if you don't have that technology with you, being able to say, well, obviously we're not going to include that in, but once you let somebody hear their audio, as Jaja says, they don't like the sound of their voice, they don't like the fact they tripped over their words on that one sentence and it makes them sound stupid, even though it doesn't, that's when you're taking context out, and you're taking the reality out, and people have been watching us for an hour and a half and will understand the rhythms of the way us three speak now, or the four of us speak. So if I then screwed about with the rhythm of how I speak because I've edited something out, it will be jarring to the audience. So I think there's a big complex theory of why you shouldn't do it, but in reality, it's just because people don't like the sound of their voice.
Yeah.
And I think just use common sense and decency when doing that.
Megan is wondering, should you have some sort of demo when looking for production roles, and what should you include, especially if you're coming from radio?
I'm going to jump in just because I've been hiring people recently, and I don't listen to demo tapes personally. I look at what they've done and their experience, and I've just hired somebody who hasn't got any professional experience, but has been doing a lot on their own. They've got their own Twitch channel where they've been streaming, so I know they're good technology wise. They've got their own podcast, and I've listened to a bit of that. So I've got like 3 episodes on their podcast, but it shows that and I listened to an episode, they had a good theory of the episode. There was a good strong beginning, middle, and end, and they were a good storyteller. but also they were active, and I think that's a really key thing. Some production companies do want a reel. They want it to specific things as well, or they want if you apply to a job at Global, they want 3 audio clips. They don't want a reel sometimes, but the BBC sometimes want a reel, or sometimes they want a specific kind of thing. Having a reel is not a bad thing. Having it on a website, not a bad thing. But I think the biggest thing is you are a lot more hireable when you are active. And that's the case in any way. It's easier to get a job when you're in a job. And it's easier to get work when people see that you're doing stuff.
Yeah, that's a great point. And in my last sort of full-time role, I was left in charge of hiring for a little bit, and I don't think people realize when you are hiring quite how like little of the material people send over. Like most hiring managers are interested in. Obviously, that's the CV thing, and LinkedIn has become more relevant now. But I mean, you get thousands of applications in some cases. It's a real quick process. So yeah, I've personally never needed or used a reel, nor when I was hiring very briefly did I listen to any reels. Similar to what Seb has just said, I think who you've worked for and what you've done in the past speaks volumes. I think if you've got 5 reputable brands at the top of your LinkedIn or CV, and you can list very quickly and briefly outline what you did exactly for them, most places will go, well, if it's up to their standard, that's up to my standard, and that's often your way in. I think if you've got, a couple of production companies, the BBC, and a huge, big conglomerate company that have hired you for a project, more often than not, that will be enough to get you through most things. So yeah, I've never bothered with a reel.
Okay, so Makeda is asking,
Sorry, Sonia, can I just come back off what Alex said just quickly and just say, just not to scare people that are watching, you don't have to have worked at the BBC and a big conglomerate and 2 big brands. Like, obviously, if you've got that, then people are going to take you a lot more seriously. But I think if you're entry level, which is what that person might have been angling at, it's just being active, showing that you've got initiative and you can do things is really key. So I would maybe have a portfolio website on a Squarespace website, whatever. Maybe have a reel on there. But I think just showing that you're active and doing stuff is really helpful.
Yes. No scaring.
Yeah, actually, I will add to what everybody said. I would just say have it ready. Just have it ready, just in case.
Always prepared.
Because like we all started off somewhere, so everybody starts off with nothing on their CV or nothing on their reel or whatever it might be. But it's so easy just to do a little bit of work for something somewhere, or even like shadowing free work, whatever it might be, and consume all of that you've done, and that's your structure, and that's what you've done. And then you can also do things in your own time, but you could work for a couple of days for one place free, and then they could be at the top of your CV, and often that's enough as well.
Thank you. So Makeda is asking, what's your preferred way of conducting and structuring interviews? How do you prefer to draw out someone's story organically?
I guess just if I'm doing the interview myself, I'm often not left in. So just be a conversation. Well, it'll be like them carrying the conversation and maybe just a clip of them. So I try not to leave myself in, as I said. But I start off with just talking to them and just seeing how their day was, how things were, and just having a normal conversation with them. And I think naturally we know, as human beings, we know how to get a bit more out of people. I think in English we've learned how to not ask closed questions unless you're trying to get straight to the point. So you ask open questions until you're trying to get definitive answers. And I've been learning very much so about when not to go too far, and learning. I think it's a little bit trickier via Zoom, but learning about people's body language if they don't want to answer anything more. And I guess in person it is much easier to kind of like get the vibe. But the question was, how do you get more out of the person?
Yeah, like how can you draw someone's story out in an organic way?
I think, I don't know. I personally, I like to make jokes, and maybe they're stupid, but I do like to make jokes, so it just makes it a bit more comfortable. Or I'll draw on something that the person has said, and then I elaborate on that. You know, oh, you just said that you love ice cream. What's your favorite ice cream? And like, when was the last time you ate it, or something like that. And then they may tell you a great story about how, you know, when the first time that they ate that ice cream. You know, so just actually showing interest. And I learned that through retail, so that wasn't even something that that was just something, you know, you kind of have to get a middle ground with somebody that you may not even talk to on a day-to-day basis. You know, you have to find some kind of commonality. Yeah.
I like what Jaja said in that warming an interviewee up is key, and not just starting an interview, logging on to Zoom, I guess, during COVID times and going, "Oh, hi, how's it going? You sound good, great. Let's go with the interview." So, when did you start that? I mean, it just doesn't. You need to build a rapport, make them feel comfortable with you if you want to get the most out of them. Like, genuinely, I'm not. You laugh, but genuinely, I've seen it happen, and I've been kind of off camera, off mic, and I've watched producers and talent go, "Oh, thanks for joining us. It's really nice having you here. Yeah, great. So anyway, should we start? I'll press record." And it's like, no, you need to warm them up so they feel safe with you. I think is key. Save your difficult questions to the end. If your interviewee doesn't want to answer them, and this comes from music journalism that I learned it, but also from normal interviews, you save the question that might end the interview for the last question. So if it's a soft case study, obviously you won't have that. But if it's more of an interview or an investigative interview, you'll save your toughest difficult questions for the end. And also something we've been experimenting with over the last few months, which I think is really important, is actually don't do it on Zoom. Don't or if you do it over the Zoom, don't do video, or do video just to say hello, and then say, okay, well, what I'm going to do now is we're both going to turn our videos off, so it's just audio, because and make sure they're wearing headphones. This I found makes them feel like people close their eyes a lot if they can't see what's going on, which makes them feel a lot more personal anyway. But then also it means they can't see you as they're giving a long answer. Go, yeah, whatever. Or looking at your notes or whatever. But then also they can't. And this is the big thing: is when they stop talking, just not saying anything, breathing into the microphone, so they know you're there. Just so they don't think Zoom's finished. But like in normal days, and when there's a vaccine and hooray, the big tip for interviews is silence is great, because everybody wants to fill silence. Everyone hears a silence when they're being interviewed or there's a conversation, and they naturally want to fill it. Which means if I've told you a bit of a story and you're not saying anything, or maybe I'll elaborate a bit more on it. Maybe I'll just say a bit more. And I think that's the really big interview. You naturally want to get something out of someone. On Zoom, if you can see me being silent, anticipating, like eagerly going, it doesn't work. But if you're able just to go, and like there'll be no video, but they hear you, and you're just, maybe they'll feel it.
Yeah, that's I agree with Seb wholeheartedly on that one. That's one of my favorite things, especially when you're not limited to like any time constraints as well. It's my least favorite thing when I hear a podcast that no one's really on a schedule. Everybody can record for a long amount of time if need be, and the host is interrupting the guest. It's like almost the opposite of what you want them to be doing, because exactly like Seb said, that silence can also sometimes breed the best moments that you'll get from your guest. That's like it's amazing advice.
Kelly has said that she needs the link to that deal. We all need the link to that Black Friday deal, so.
I think I can find it. I'll dig it out and or Sarah can. I'll send it to Sarah.
Thank you. Kelly, we'll try to get that link to you. So Mira is also asking, do you have practical advice for freelance podcast producers who are new in the industry and trying to get work? So for example, like, would you make a website with audio demos? Would you go straight to pitching to companies? What would you do?
I've never been freelance, to be honest, so I wouldn't necessarily know. But I think by being a freelance radio producer, I definitely, or kind of just working at community radio stations and kind of winging it, just be everywhere. As everybody said already, just make sure that you look good on social media. You look good, like you've got your website, you've got your social media popping. There's nothing controversial on your Twitter. You know, just making sure that, because people are going to watch your social media when you are pitching yourself, they're going to look at everything, making sure that you've got everything up to date, networking. I just think immerse yourself in the culture, join, you can join like the Facebook groups, podcast. There's so many like podcast Facebook help groups where you can talk about podcast stuff. Become a nerd. Like, if you really want to do it, you will find a way. Yeah.
I was furiously digging for that deal. So sorry, it was advice for freelance wanting to get into the industry, right? Yeah, I think, as Jaja just said, the UK Audio Network is a Google group, if you don't know. That's a huge place. To be honest, when I started freelancing, I landed a few jobs from that initially, and then all of my work since, I think, has come off of those few jobs. That was my beginning point, and it just sort of spirals on. So yeah, I think if you're not on that, it's a free to join, free to access. I think if you just Google UK Audio Network, you can find the website, press join, and that's a brilliant place to start. And yeah, just be available to absolutely everything. Know what your skills are. Don't try and blag your way into something that you're not comfortable or you don't know how to do. But yeah, just be open to absolutely everything, even if it involves, a bit of traveling. Pre-COVID times, a bit of traveling, moving around, trying something new that you can do, but perhaps isn't in your interest, because like these things will breed other connections, and your network just grows so rapidly if you're just open to every opportunity, I think.
I really don't have anything to add. I think it's just, I think the biggest tip is making sure your social media is not controversial and clean, and like you're not dropping the C-bomb every 2 seconds. I think is a big thing. Like, genuinely, it's something that I struggle with a lot. So don't follow me on Twitter if you don't like that word. I say Christmas all the time. No, I'm only joking. Easy punchline. But genuinely, it's just making sure you've got stuff up to date. You look professional. Like, and even if it's just like you might have the cutest Twitter bio ever, but maybe just stick radio producer at the front of it, or radio and podcast producer. Just make it look a bit more professional. I think goes a long way, because subconsciously people will look at you and look at your presentation that you put out there and go, oh yeah, they look like everybody else that I work with, and they talk like the other, tweeting some industry news now and again, or just tweet something that's big that's happening and pin it to your profile.
Thanks, everyone.
Sorry, I've just found the thing, so I'll pop it in the chat and somebody can put it in the YouTube chat for Isotope.
Thanks. Sorry, Daisy is asking, what are your thoughts on podcast networks? Do we need some of them in the UK, and why?
I mean, do they want to set up a podcast network, or do they want to join a podcast network? I mean, there are benefits and there are downfalls. I think the benefits are you have bigger discoverability, because you have bigger discoverability because people are listening to something, they might click through to you. You might have greater marketing budget if you join a podcast network. They might push you out using on their social media. I mean, there are lots of benefits, but also there are lots of flaws in that. If a podcast network has 50 podcasts, they're not going to tweet 100 times a day, and if they do, no one's going to follow them. Which means they're only going to push one or two or they're going to push a small percentage of podcasts a week or per day on their social networks, which means actually you're not getting the biggest marketing push you could if you weren't doing your own. And it doesn't mean you can't, but and then do they attach adverts for you? What's the split? Would you have gotten that audience a bit slower if you'd done it on your own? What kind of support are they giving you? Are you giving up your IP? This is a big thing that no one really talks about, is who owns the IP of the podcast. And when I say IP, I mean intellectual property. So this antiquing podcast that I was talking about, which I think is a cracking great deal. In fact, I'm going to call it Cracking Great Deal. That's going to be the name of the podcast, and that's my intellectual property, that name. The name, the format, Cracking Great Deal with Seb White. It's good. I'll tell you, it's going to be top of the charts by the end of the year, 2024. And it's going to be... But that's the IP. So now if I join a podcast network, Cracking Great Deal, do they want a slice of that IP pie? Spotify bought 2 production companies or podcast networks a couple of years ago, as we all know. One of them was for single-digit millions. One was for double-digit millions. And the double-digit million company, and I always get the names swapped around, so I'm not going to say them, but the one that got a lot more was because that company and the corporate directors and whatever, the company owned the intellectual property for their podcasts. So they owned everything about them. So that means that then when Spotify bought them, they could run books, merchandise, TV, they could sell it to Netflix, and they would gain the profit, and that's where the value was. So do the network want to take your IP? Do they want to own part of it? How much are you having to give up to be part of it? I think there are lots of benefits to them short term. There are lots of flaws to them long term. And it's a matter of, and even stuff like Acast and everyone else, there are benefits and there are flaws. And it's a matter of what's right. Is it a personal podcast? Is it a professional one? What's right for you in that moment? Are you happy to give up a bit of IP or a bit of profit in the short term to then get to a bigger place that maybe you wouldn't do without, maybe you wouldn't get without them? It's a trade-off, isn't it?
Does anyone else, Alex, do you have any thoughts on podcast networks?
Seb summarised that really well. I guess whenever I hear podcast network, I think kind of back to like the early days of YouTube. And I feel like in the early days of YouTube, networks were like the big thing. Every channel was being offered network deals, and they could pay you more money than the YouTube AdSense, could pay you. And that was like a huge thing for a while. It was big sort of groups of channels. But I mean, I feel like now on YouTube, maybe I'm out of the loop slightly, but I don't feel like those really exist anymore. It just clearly maybe didn't work for them. I guess I always kind of think of it as that kind of format. So yeah, I think similar to what Seb said, I think find out what you want from a thing. If you want to own the sole property of it and it's your baby and you want to be the person who's related to that regardless, then giving up your idea probably isn't the best thing. But if you've got a great idea and you're just interested in maybe making some money off of that idea, then maybe selling it to a company is a great way for you to do that. And if you're someone who can come up with ideas so many ideas all the time, then yeah, give a few of them away and be able to put dinner on the table. And then you can perhaps take control of the rest of them along the way.
One thing I did want to add actually, and that's really, really great points, Alex and Seb, but one thing that I want to add is I'm looking at it like the music industry and like businesses as well, because like your podcast is technically, you can look at it as a business, because as Seb said, that you can sell it to TV or radio or like Netflix, wherever you want to sell it, and you have to look at it as though it's something that's of worth. And yeah, if it is your passion, your passion project, you will feel a bit of a waste. You have to give away all your intellectual property, and other companies are making all the money off it. One of the things that I really wanted to mention though is that you have to look at who you're going to be working with. So we had the thing that happened with Joe Malone, with John Boyega, and this is not in podcasting, but it's a company. You know, Joe Malone's name is the company. However, she sold that company for quite a few years ago, actually. However, there was controversy with there being somewhat racism towards John Boyega. However, she had nothing to do with it. So if you have an association with a company that hasn't necessarily got the right a network that hasn't got the right credibility, or they're not pushing content that aligns with your beliefs, you have to be careful of that, and you have to be wary that if there's something that you stand for and this company or this network doesn't stand for that, and they're pushing out content, because there's a lot of right-winged podcasts out here, you know, and if you don't believe that, however, you've signed to that network, you know, your product is going to be associated with that. So I think that that's one thing that people don't necessarily consider, but it's definitely something that you know, money comes, money goes. And if you're gonna, you know, there's so many people who are going into like terrible deals, music deals. We were talking about this today with my team, about people going into terrible music deals, and, you know, maybe getting, you know, a lump sum of like, you know, 200 grand up front. However, they've got no rights over their songs for the rest of their life. You know, is it worth it? You know, so that's something to consider.
So, Jaja, what you're saying is, cracking date, great deal. I should name it Alex Graham's Cracking Great Deal. Okay.
Yes, please.
So we're down now to our final two questions before we finish for tonight. So the second to last question is, how do you get freelance gigs?
That's a huge question. And I just want to put a disclaimer before this. Seb found the audio deal before I did. I took credit, didn't mean to, didn't see it. So it's all Seb. He's a great person here, not me. Yeah, freelance gigs. I think for me personally, it's been through the UK Audio Network. That's been a huge avenue for me, like I just said, for freelance gigs. There is people all over the industry on there. There's also there's loads of equivalents in the States as well. So there's a lot of, especially in this sort of time we're in with remote working, there's a lot of opportunity to work overseas, or for overseas clients that are looking for people here, just by getting out there. So yeah, I think that's the best way to do it.
I mean, I'm quite lucky in that I don't really apply for jobs anymore. They come to me. But when I did, and the marketplace wasn't so competitive, I would just approach people and say, I'd email them, or I would stalk them essentially. And I mean, not properly stalk them, but I'd be, are there industry events? Obviously, COVID kind of stops that for a few months. Are there industry events where I can bump into them at the free bar or at a coffee morning or whatever, and be, oh, hi, so you do this thing? Well, I'm this person, and yeah, lovely to see you. And then I'd follow them on Twitter, and I make sure if I did follow them, I'd unfollow them the day before, so when I met them I could follow them and they would get the notification that I followed them there and then,
and they'll remember.
So they'll be like, oh, there's this person I've just met, great, follow back. So then you've got access to DMs, and you can say, oh, you can use it sparingly and go, I've got this idea, or whatever. But I think at the moment, because podcasting is so huge, my advice would be, look at small businesses. Look at people where you think actually a podcast could work. So there's a spirits company that I'm working with, not in audio at all, helping them do some marketing. It's a friend of mine's parents' company, blah blah blah. Makes it sound really posh. It's not at all. And I'm going to be like, what do you think about our podcast? We could approach, if you've got enough money, we could approach somebody from like Sunday Brunch or whatever, or, you know, one of these people that talks about alcohol on the television, and get them to do a thing or whatever. And actually, Are there that many podcasts? Not that I found. Maybe it's a niche. But like my local Chinese takeaway, I think we could do a really hilarious podcast with them. If I like, and I reckon that we could have, because I live in trendy East London, I'm sure there are interesting people we could do an interview series with over a takeaway, like at the counter while they wait for it to be cooked. Well, that might be a good idea. So maybe I'll talk to them about it. Maybe they probably won't have the budget for it, but there's an idea there about actually approaching people saying, obviously everyone does marketing. Have you thought about a podcast as a marketing idea? It might be quite cheap, especially if you're entry level. That might be an interesting way to approach it and to get, again, to have a history of work underneath your belt.
So go back to the question again. That was amazing. So I kind of got lost in that.
Oh, the question.
Yeah,
I
got lost.
Was how do you get freelance gigs?
I guess echo Alex and Seb, but similar to Seb, people have been coming back to me because they know that I'm in podcasting already. But I think something that Seb said earlier on anyway was just make sure you have like podcast producer in your bio, because when you search for podcast producer, it will pop up in, if you search for it in Google, sometimes it does come up in the search engine and also on LinkedIn as well. And getting your name out there, again, as we said, the networks, also having these conversations with people and saying, hey, just to let you know, I do podcasting, whoever you want to work with, literally just what Seb said. And I've been a professional stalker in my radio days. Oh my God, like it's, you keep it professional, obviously you're not stalking their lives, but just knowing that, they're going to be at a talk. I see that hand, Seb. But just knowing just to make sure that you go with an intention to speak to the right person and leaving a lasting impression. And if you've got some business cards as well, I know they're really old school, but they actually, people, if they put it in their wallet and they forget about it, and then a year later they see, oh yeah, I've got, this person's business card, is quite useful.
I feel like the modern equivalent of that is showing someone your link tree in real life. Is that what it's called? That's the new business card. But now we're at the last question now. But because of how short we are on time, I'm gonna ask that everybody keeps their answer to 30 seconds, which is gonna be really difficult, but let's do it. Let's see if you guys are really talented. So the final question now is there a standard release form for talent and contributors, and is it available online? Seb, I'm going to pick on you.
I mean, no. It's a short answer. There are lots of. I started at 12. There are lots of standard forms that are available online. There are different legal practices that will have just Google it. If you want to do your due diligence properly, get a lawyer to check them. Pay for one day for a lawyer to check over them, make sure they're legally sound. That means that if they're not, it's the lawyer's responsibility and not yours, which then gives you a lot of cover. So that's what I would do. 30 seconds, boom.
Oh, that was good timing. Alex, your turn.
That's a professional right there. Exactly the same. There's lots of templates, lots of things online, resources everywhere. So yeah, just utilize online, find yourself a template that works for you. And yeah, as Seb said, that you can hire legal help if you're already that deep in a proper project. But most of the time, what you can find on Google on your own is just enough.
I have nothing to add.
Oh, that saves us a bit of time. So that brings us to the end of today's Ask the Producers. Don't forget to tweet Rise and Shine Audio at Rise Shine Audio, and you can find me at Sonia versus World. Also listen to my podcast, Black Insight. If you want to chat to any of our panelists on Twitter, you can tweet Seb at Seb White, Jaja at Jaja __Mohammed, and Alex _Graham01. Thank you, everyone. Bye.